The gunshot echoed across the vast Montana prairie, sending a flock of startled birds into the twilight sky. Lily Daniels clutched her side, crimson seeping between her trembling fingers as she stumbled forward, the world tilting beneath her feet. Her horse, spooked by the gunfire, had bolted moments ago, leaving her alone and wounded miles from the nearest settlement. The sun was setting fast, painting the horizon in fiery hues that mocked the warmth rapidly draining from her body. Preston O'Malley had been tracking a small herd of wild mustangs when he heard the shot. Instinct and years of surviving the harsh realities of the frontier had taught him to distinguish between the sound of a hunter's rifle and the sinister crack of a gun aimed at human prey. Digging his spurs into his stallion's flanks, he raced toward the source of the disturbance, his hand resting on the Colt revolver at his hip. The year was 1878, and Montana Territory remained a lawless frontier where fortunes were made and lives were lost with equal indifference. Preston had seen his share of both in his 30 years. The last 10 spent roaming the West after the war between the states had left him with nightmares and a distaste for civilization. He spotted her just as she collapsed, a slender figure in a dust-covered riding skirt, crumpling to the ground like a marionette with cut strings. Dismounting in one fluid motion, Preston approached cautiously, scanning the horizon for whoever had shot her. Seeing no immediate threat, he knelt beside the fallen woman. "Madam, can you hear me?" Lily's eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of summer storms. "Help," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the prairie wind. "They took everything." Preston gently moved her hand aside to examine the wound. The bullet had grazed her ribs, leaving an angry furrow that bled freely but hadn't penetrated deeply. She'd lost blood, but with proper care, she would survive. "You're going to be all right," he said, tearing a strip from his spare bandana to make a temporary bandage. "What's your name?" "Lily," she managed between shallow breaths. "Lily Daniels." "I'm Preston O'Malley. You can call me Prees." He worked quickly, applying pressure to stem the bleeding. "Who did this to you, Miss Daniels?" A shiver racked her body, partly from shock and partly from the rapidly cooling evening air. "Men. 3 of them followed me from Silver Creek," said I. "Had something that belonged to them." Preston frowned. Silver Creek was a mining settlement 2 days' ride south, a rough place where fortunes were won and lost at card tables and claim stakes. "And did you?" The ghost of a smile touched her pale lips. "Only my father's pocket watch." They seemed mighty disappointed. The wound bandaged as best he could manage, Preston gathered her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, fragile despite the spirit evident in her eyes. Another violent shiver coursed through her body, and he pulled her closer against his chest. The cowboy held her close as she shivered, whispering, "You'll live, I need you to." Lily's eyes widened at his words, surprise momentarily overtaking pain. "Need me to? Sir, we've only just met." "I reckon I can't leave a lady to die on my conscience," Preston replied, his voice gruff but gentle. "My cabin's about an hour's ride from here." "Can you hold on that long?" She nodded weakly, and he lifted her onto his horse before mounting behind her. With one arm securing her against him, Preston turned his mount toward home, keeping a vigilant eye on the darkening landscape. Whoever had attacked her might still be nearby. As they rode, Lily drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling words that made little sense. Preston caught fragments about a map, her father, and something about a mine that had been abandoned years ago. He stored these details away, focusing instead on the immediate need to get her to safety. The cabin appeared as a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky when they finally arrived. It wasn't much, a sturdy one-room structure Preston had built with his own hands 3 years prior, after deciding that the wandering life no longer suited him. A small corral housed his spare mount and a milk cow, and a stream bubbled nearby, providing fresh water year-round. He dismounted carefully, keeping Lily balanced in the saddle until he could lift her down. She was conscious but dazed, her skin alarmingly cool to the touch despite the warm spring evening. "Stay with me, Lily," he urged as he carried her inside and placed her on his bed. He worked quickly to light the oil lamp and stoke the embers in the fireplace to a proper blaze. With gentle hands, he removed her torn and bloodied blouse, keeping his eyes professionally fixed on the wound rather than her lace-trimmed chemise. The makeshift bandage had held, but the wound needed proper cleaning and dressing. "This will hurt," he warned, reaching for a bottle of whiskey. Lily's eyes focused briefly. "Not my first injury, Cowboy," she said with unexpected steel in her voice. Preston couldn't help but smile as he poured the amber liquid over the wound. To her credit, Lily only gasped once, her fingers digging into the rough woolen blanket beneath her. Working methodically, he cleaned and dressed the wound with supplies from the small medical kit he kept a habit formed during the war, when he'd assisted field surgeons more times than he cared to remember. Once finished, he helped her into one of his clean shirts, which swallowed her slender frame. "Thank you," she murmured as he tucked the blankets around her. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." "Get some rest," Preston replied, uncomfortable with gratitude. "We can talk in the morning." He settled into the rocking chair by the fire, his Winchester rifle across his knees. Whatever trouble had followed Lily Daniels to his doorstep, he'd be ready for it. Dawn broke clear and cold, filtering through the cabin's single window to cast long shadows across the plank floor. Preston, who had dozed fitfully throughout the night, rose to check on his patient. Lily's cheeks had regained some color, and her breathing was deep and regular. The fever he'd feared hadn't materialized. He busied himself preparing a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush and coffee, the familiar routine a comfort after the previous day's unexpected events. The aroma of brewing coffee eventually roused Lily, who blinked owlishly at her unfamiliar surroundings before her gaze settled on Preston. "Good morning," he said, pouring a cup of the strong black brew. "How are you feeling?" Lily pushed herself up to sitting, wincing slightly. "Like I've been trampled by a buffalo, but I suspect that's better than the alternative." She accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "I believe I owe you my life, Mr. O'Malley. Please," he corrected automatically. "And you don't owe me anything. Anyone would have done the same." A wry smile curved her lips. "We both know that's not true, not out here." She took a sip of coffee, her eyes never leaving his face. "You're an unusual man, Preston O'Malley." Something in her direct gaze made him uncomfortable, as though she could see past the gruff exterior he'd cultivated over years of solitude. He turned back to the stove, spooning mush into 2 wooden bowls. "You should eat. Build your strength." He handed her a bowl and sat on the edge of the bed, keeping a respectful distance. "When you're ready, I'd like to know why those men were after you." Lily stared into her bowl for a long moment. "It's a complicated story." "I've got time," she sighed, setting aside the barely touched breakfast. "My father was Emmett Daniels. Does that name mean anything to you?" Preston shook his head. "He was a geologist for the Montana Mining Company. About a year ago, he discovered something while surveying north of Silver Creek, a vein of gold so rich he said it would change everything." Her fingers twisted in the blanket. He didn't trust the company to treat the discovery fairly. They have a history of cheating their employees out of rightful claims. "So he kept it secret," Preston guessed. Lily nodded. "He made detailed maps, planning to file an independent claim once he'd gathered enough evidence. But before he could, there was an accident." Her voice caught. A cave-in at one of the company mines. They said he died instantly. Preston watched her carefully, noting the way her eyes hardened at the mention of the accident. "You don't believe it was an accident," he stated rather than asked. "My father inspected mines for a living, Mr. O'Malley. He knew every sign of instability, every warning. He would never have entered a dangerous shaft." She looked up, meeting his gaze squarely. "Someone wanted him silenced, and you have his maps," Preston concluded, the pieces falling into place. "I did. They were in his watch, a special compartment he designed himself. But those men—" She touched her side gingerly. "They took it. They must have known somehow." Preston set his empty bowl aside. "Why come all the way out here? Silver Creek's a fair distance to travel alone, especially for a woman." A flash of irritation crossed her face. "I'm more capable than I might appear at present, Mr. O'Malley. I've been taking care of myself since my mother died when I was 16. She softened slightly at his raised eyebrow. "But you're right to question. I came looking for Jacob Thorne. He was my father's partner and friend. I thought he might help me understand what happened." "Thorne," Preston frowned. "Older fella, beard down to here." He gestured to his chest. Lily leaned forward eagerly. "You know him. He has a claim about 20 miles north, keeps to himself mostly, but trades at the same outpost I do." Preston rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Haven't seen him in a few months, though. Figured he was working his claim." Hope and desperation mingled in Lily's expression. "I need to find him. He's the only one who might know what my father discovered. And if those men figure out the maps were incomplete—" Preston stood abruptly. "You're not going anywhere for at least a few days. That wound needs time to heal." "I don't have time," she protested. "Those men could. Those men think they have what they came for," he interrupted. "And they have no reason to believe you'd come all this way to find Thorne. You're safe here for now." Lily looked like she wanted to argue further, but instead sank back against the pillows, suddenly pale. "Perhaps you're right. A day or two to regain my strength." Preston nodded, satisfied. "Rest. I'll tend to the animals and see about finding you some proper clothes. Can't have you riding around the territory in my shirt. Folks might talk." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Heaven forbid." Over the next 3 days, Lily recuperated with surprising speed. By the second morning, she insisted on helping with the cabin's daily chores, though Preston limited her to tasks that wouldn't strain her injury. He discovered she was skilled with a needle, mending several of his shirts that had been awaiting attention and altering one of his spare trousers to fit her slender frame until proper women's clothing could be obtained. They fell into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. Preston found himself talking more than he had in years, sharing stories of his travels across the frontier. Lily was an attentive listener, her quick mind and occasional sharp wit drawing him out of his habitual reserve. In turn, she told him of her life in Helena, where she'd worked as a schoolteacher after her father took the position with the mining company. Her eyes lit up when she spoke of her students and the small library she'd helped establish in the growing town. "Why didn't you stay there?" Preston asked one evening as they sat on the cabin's small porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. "After your father died, I mean. Teaching seems a safer profession than chasing mining claims and outrunning gunmen." Lily's fingers traced the pattern of the quilt she'd wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. "I couldn't let it go, the injustice of it. My father wasn't just my family. He was a good man who deserved better than to be buried in a company plot with a cursory investigation and a formal letter of condolence." Her voice hardened. "And if what he found was valuable enough for someone to kill for, it's valuable enough for me to risk everything to claim it rightfully." Preston studied her profile in the fading light. There was a stubborn set to her jaw that he recognized all too well, the look of someone who wouldn't be deterred once their mind was made up. "We'll ride out tomorrow," he said finally, "if you're strong enough." She turned to him, surprise evident. "We? You didn't think I'd let you go alone, did you?" He stood, stretching his tall frame. "Those men are still out there, and you still have a bullet wound that's barely started healing." "I can't ask you to. You didn't ask." Preston cut her off gently. "I'm offering. Besides, Thorne knows me. He's a suspicious old coot, might not even speak to you if you showed up alone." Lily studied him for a long moment. "Why would you help me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Preston couldn't quite articulate the answer himself. Maybe it was the courage he saw in her eyes, or the determination that reminded him of qualities he'd thought lost to the war and the hard years after. Or maybe it was simply that for the first time in a long while, he'd found someone whose company he genuinely enjoyed. "Let's just say I've got my own quarrel with men who think they can take whatever they want without consequence," he said finally. "Get some sleep. We leave at first light." The morning dawned clear and cool, ideal for traveling. Preston had risen before dawn to prepare, packing supplies for several days and ensuring both horses were properly shod for the rocky terrain they would traverse. His spare mount, a steady bay mare he called Penny, would carry Lily. She emerged from the cabin dressed in the modified trousers and one of his smaller shirts, her hair braided and pinned beneath a wide-brimmed hat he'd found in a trunk. The masculine attire should have looked out of place on her slender frame, but instead gave her an air of capable determination that suited her far better than the torn riding dress she'd arrived in. "Will this do?" she asked, turning in a small circle. "I know it's not proper, but it's practical," Preston interrupted. "And out here, that matters more than proper." He handed her a revolver, smaller than his own but well-maintained. "You know how to use this." Lily took the weapon with practiced ease, checking the cylinder before tucking it into the holster he'd adjusted for her. "My father made sure of it, said a woman alone needed to protect herself." "Smart man," Preston nodded approvingly. "Let's hope you won't need it." They set out as the sun crested the eastern hills, following a trail that wound through stands of aspen and pine, before emerging onto open grassland. Preston kept a watchful eye on Lily, alert for any sign that the journey was taxing her strength, but she rode with confidence, her posture betraying only occasional discomfort when the mare navigated particularly rough terrain. By midday, they'd covered nearly 15 miles. They stopped to rest the horses beside a clear running creek, sharing a simple meal of jerky and hardtack in companionable silence. "How did you end up here?" Lily asked suddenly. "You don't strike me as a man who was born to solitude." Preston tossed a pebble into the creek, watching the ripples spread. "I was a captain in the Union Army. After Gettysburg, they made me a major." He rarely spoke of those days, but something about Lily's direct gaze made evasion seem pointless. "Came west after the war, like a lot of men. Couldn't settle back into normal life. And your family? Gone. Farm in Pennsylvania was sold to pay debts after my father died. Mother followed a year later." He shrugged as if the loss was inconsequential, though they both knew better. "Brother died at Antietam. Sister married a shopkeeper in Philadelphia. We write occasionally." Lily absorbed this in silence, her expression thoughtful. "So you chose this life alone in the wilderness." "It chose me," he corrected. "Or maybe we chose each other. There's a kind of peace here you can't find elsewhere. No expectations except survival." "Sounds lonely," she observed softly. Preston met her gaze. "It was, until recently." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibility, until the distant cry of a hawk broke the spell. Preston stood, brushing dust from his trousers. We should keep moving. Thorne's claim is still a good piece away, and I'd like to make most of the distance before nightfall. They rode in silence for the next hour, each lost in their own thoughts. The terrain gradually became more rugged as they approached the foothills, requiring more concentration to navigate safely. It was late afternoon when Preston suddenly raised his hand, signaling Lily to halt. "What is it?" she whispered, instantly alert. Preston's eyes narrowed as he scanned the rocky ridge ahead. "Not sure. Thought I saw movement." He reached for his rifle. "Stay here." Before he could dismount, a shot rang out, the bullet kicking up dirt inches from his horse's hooves. The stallion reared, nearly unseating him, as two more shots followed in quick succession. "Ride," Preston shouted, wheeling his mount around and urging Lily toward a stand of trees 100 yards back. They galloped across the open ground, bullets whining overhead until they reached the relative safety of the tree line. Dismounting quickly, Preston helped Lily from her saddle. "Are you hit?" She shook her head, face pale but composed. "No, you. I'm fine." He secured the horses and drew his rifle. "Stay down. I'm going to circle around, see if I can spot them." "I'm coming with you," Lily insisted, drawing her revolver. Preston started to object but recognized the determined set of her jaw. "Stay close, and if I say run, you run. No arguments." Moving carefully through the undergrowth, they skirted the edge of the clearing, using the trees for cover. Preston's experienced eye caught signs of recent passage, broken twigs, disturbed leaf litter leading toward a rocky outcropping that would provide an excellent vantage point for ambush. He signaled Lily to stop, pointing toward the rocks. Understanding immediately, she nodded, crouching lower as Preston continued forward alone, moving with the silent grace of a man accustomed to stalking both animals and men. A twig snapped to his left and Preston froze, every sense alert. The rustle of cloth against stone gave away the shooter's position a moment before a man rose from behind a boulder, rifle aimed directly at Preston's chest. "Drop it, O'Malley," the man growled, his weathered face twisted in a mirthless grin. "Unless you're eager to meet your maker." Preston recognized him as one of the rougher elements from Silver Creek, a hired gun named Mercer who worked for whoever paid the highest price, which meant the men who'd attacked Lily were likely nearby. "Didn't know you'd taken up bushwhacking, Mercer," Preston replied evenly, keeping his rifle ready but not raising it. "Not much sport in shooting a man from ambush." Mercer shrugged. "It's just business, nothing personal. Now drop the gun before my associates get impatient." Preston's mind raced. If Mercer had companions, they were likely positioned to cut off escape routes. But the hired gun's focus was entirely on him, which meant a shot cracked from behind Preston, and Mercer jerked backward with a cry of pain, his rifle discharging harmlessly into the air as he clutched his shoulder. Preston spun to see Lily standing firm, her revolver still raised and smoking. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing her arm as angry shouts erupted from multiple directions. They crashed through the underbrush, bullets splintering bark around them as they zigzagged between trees. "The horses," Lily gasped as they ran. "Too exposed," Preston replied grimly. "We need cover first." They stumbled onto a game trail that led deeper into the woods, following it until the sounds of pursuit grew fainter. Preston pulled Lily into a natural hollow formed by the gnarled roots of an ancient pine. "Are you all right?" he asked, checking her for injuries. She nodded, breathing hard but composed. "I'm sorry I shot him. I didn't mean to hit him, just distract him, but my hand wasn't steady." Preston couldn't help but smile despite the gravity of their situation. "You saved my life. I'd call that good shooting." His expression sobered. "But now we know those men are still looking for you, and they've got help." "How did they find us?" Lily wondered. I was so careful leaving Helena. Someone must have talked, or they've been watching Thorn, figuring you might seek him out. Preston peered cautiously from their hiding place. We can't stay here. Once they regroup, they'll search systematically. Lily touched his arm. I won't put you in further danger. This is my fight, not yours. Preston covered her hand with his own. I made it my fight when I found you bleeding on the prairie. His voice softened. Besides, I reckon we make a pretty good team. The gratitude and something deeper in her eyes made his heart quicken in a way he hadn't experienced in years. For a moment, the danger surrounding them faded into insignificance compared to the connection growing between them. A distant shout broke the spell. Preston released her hand reluctantly. We need to move. There's an old trapper's cabin about 3 miles west. If we can reach it before dark, we'll have shelter for the night. And tomorrow we find another way to Thorn. They traveled cautiously through the deepening afternoon, avoiding open areas and keeping to game trails when possible. Lily moved with surprising stamina despite her recent injury, though Preston noted the tightness around her mouth that betrayed her pain. The sun was setting when they finally reached the trapper's cabin, little more than a crude shelter of logs and a partially collapsed roof, long abandoned to the elements. Still, its stone fireplace remained intact, and the walls would provide protection from the night's chill and prying eyes. Preston secured the door with a fallen branch while Lily gathered what dry wood she could find nearby. They dared not light a fire until full darkness, lest smoke give away their position, so they huddled together in the gathering dusk, speaking in hushed tones. Why would the mining company go to such lengths? Preston wondered. Gold claims are disputed all the time without resorting to murder. Lily shook her head. I don't think it's just about gold. My father mentioned something else in his last letter, something about the future of energy that made no sense to me at the time. She rubbed her arms against the evening chill. Whatever he found, it's worth killing for. As darkness fell completely, Preston carefully lit a small fire, positioning himself to block its light from the cabin's single window. The flames cast dancing shadows on the rough walls as they shared the meager rations Preston had managed to grab before their hasty departure. We should try to get some sleep, he suggested once they'd eaten. Tomorrow will be a long day. Lily nodded, fatigue evident in the slump of her shoulders. Preston spread his coat on the dirt floor, creating a makeshift bed for her near the fire. What about you? She asked as he settled against the wall, his rifle across his knees. I'll keep watch, he replied. Get some rest. Lily hesitated, then moved to sit beside him, her shoulder touching his. We can take turns. You need sleep too. Preston started to object but realized she was right. They were partners in this now, each dependent on the other. 2 hours, then I'll wake you. She smiled, the firelight catching the gold flecks in her gray eyes. Thank you, Preston, not just for this but for believing me, for helping when you had no reason to. I had reason enough, he said softly. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Preston found himself leaning closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. Lily's breath caught, her lips parting slightly as the distance between them narrowed. A sudden crack from outside, a branch breaking underfoot, shattered the moment. Preston was on his feet instantly, rifle ready, signaling Lily to extinguish the fire. They froze in darkness, barely breathing as footsteps circled the cabin. Could be an animal, Lily whispered, barely audible. Preston shook his head, pointing to the window where a lantern's glow now bobbed in the distance. More lights appeared, converging on the cabin from different directions. They found us, he mouthed. Quickly assessing their options, he gestured toward a trapdoor in the corner, likely a root cellar used by the original occupant. Lily understood immediately. moving silently across the cabin to help him lift the heavy wooden door. The space beneath was small and musty, but large enough for both of them if they pressed close together. Preston lowered Lily down first, then followed, easing the trapdoor shut above them just as the cabin door burst open with a splintering crash. Heavy footsteps moved across the floor overhead, accompanied by rough voices. "They were here," someone growled. "Fire's still warm, can't have gotten far." "Check outside," another voice ordered. "They might be hiding in the woods." Preston and Lily remained motionless in their hiding place, her body trembling slightly against his. He held her close, one hand covering her mouth gently, though she showed no sign of making a sound. Her heartbeat raced against his chest, matching his own accelerated pulse. Minutes stretched like hours as the men searched the cabin, overturning the few pieces of broken furniture and kicking at the walls in frustration. At one point, Boots stood directly above the trapdoor, and Preston tightened his grip on his revolver, prepared to fight if they were discovered. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the voices receded, and the cabin door slammed shut. Still, they waited, knowing it could be a trick to flush them out. Only when the sounds of the search party had faded completely into the distance did Preston cautiously push open the trapdoor and peer out. The cabin was empty, illuminated only by moonlight streaming through the window. He helped Lily climb out of their hiding place, both of them stiff from holding still for so long in the confined space. "That was too close," she whispered, brushing dirt from her clothes. "They're not going to give up, are they?" Preston moved to the window, scanning the darkened forest. "No, but they'll expect us to keep running west, toward Thorne's claim. We'll go south instead, circle around when we've lost them." "If Thorne is the target, he could be in danger too," Lily pointed out. "We need to warn him." Preston nodded grimly. "First light, we move. For now, we should," he broke off as a new sound reached them, horses approaching at a gallop, not bothering with stealth. Before they could react, the cabin was surrounded, lanterns blazing from all sides. "O'Malley," a voice called. "We know you're in there. Send out the woman and we'll let you walk away." Preston exchanged a look with Lily. "Back door," she mouthed. He shook his head. The cabin had only one entrance, a fatal flaw in its design. They were trapped. "You've got 1 minute before we burn this place to the ground," the voice shouted. "Your choice, O'Malley," Preston's mind raced. The cellar wouldn't protect them from fire, and making a break for it would mean running through a gauntlet of armed men. But surrender meant certain death for Lily and likely for him as well. "I have an idea," Lily whispered urgently. She quickly outlined her plan, and Preston's eyes widened. "It's too dangerous," he objected. "More dangerous than burning alive," she countered. "Trust me." Their time was running out. With a reluctant nod, Preston positioned himself by the door while Lily moved to the window. "Wait," she called out. "Don't shoot, I'm coming out." Lily, "No." Preston shouted, playing his part in their desperate gambit. Lily climbed onto the windowsill, clearly visible to the men outside. "I'll come with you," she called. "Just don't hurt him. He's just a stranger who helped me when I was wounded." "Smart decision, lady," the voice replied. "Step out slowly, hands where we can see them." As Lily made a show of easing through the window, Preston counted silently. On 3, he kicked open the cabin door and fired 2 rapid shots into the air, creating a momentary distraction. Simultaneously, Lily dropped from the window and rolled beneath the cabin's raised foundation, disappearing from view. Confused shouts erupted as the men tried to track 2 targets at once. Preston ducked back inside as bullets splintered the doorframe, then ran to the trapdoor, throwing it open. Moments later, Lily scrambled in from outside, having crawled through the narrow space beneath the cabin to reach the cellar entrance from the rear. "Now what?" she gasped, dirt streaking her face. Preston pulled her toward the fireplace. "Old trapper's trick," he explained, pushing aside debris to reveal a narrow tunnel behind the hearth, an emergency escape route built by the paranoid original owner. "Hurry!" They crawled into the cramped passage as lanterns appeared at the windows and door. The tunnel stretched for about 30 feet, emerging in a dense thicket several yards from the cabin. From their concealed position, they watched as the frustrated hunters set fire to the abandoned structure, believing their quarry still inside. "We need to move while they're distracted," Preston whispered, taking Lily's hand. "Stay low and follow me." They crept through the underbrush, putting distance between themselves and the burning cabin. The rugged terrain worked to their advantage, providing numerous hiding places as they made their way southeast, away from both their pursuers and Thorne's claim. Dawn found them huddled in a rocky crevice, exhausted but alive. They traveled through the night, stopping only when the risk of injury from the difficult terrain in darkness outweighed the benefit of continued flight. "We need to find water," Preston said, assessing their situation, "and figure out exactly who we're dealing with." Lily leaned against the rock wall, fatigue evident in every line of her body. The strain of travel had reopened her wound, a small bloodstain visible on her shirt. "Let me see," Preston insisted, gently lifting the fabric to examine the injury. "It's nothing," she protested weakly. "It's not nothing," he countered, using his canteen to clean the wound. "You're pushing yourself too hard." Lily watched his face as he worked, his touch careful and sure. "Why are you really helping me, Preston?" she asked softly. The truth this time, his hands stilled. Looking up, he met her gaze directly. "Because from the moment I found you, something changed, as if I'd been waiting without knowing what I was waiting for." The admission cost him, unused as he was to revealing his feelings, but he continued. "I've been alone a long time. By choice, I told myself. But then you appeared, and suddenly solitude doesn't seem like freedom anymore." Lily's expression softened, her hand rising to touch his cheek. "I felt it too. Even half-conscious and bleeding, I knew you were someone I could trust, someone who mattered." She smiled faintly. "My father would have called it providence." Preston turned his face into her palm, the simple contact more intimate than any embrace. "Once we find Thorne and sort this mess, what then? Will you go back to teaching in Helena?" The question hung between them, laden with implications neither was ready to voice explicitly. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything's changed. I can't go back to the life I had before." Her eyes held his. "But I'm beginning to imagine a different future." The moment was broken by the distant sound of horses, too many to be casual travelers in this remote area. Preston helped Lily to her feet, his decision made. "There's a place about 3 miles from here, a box canyon with a hidden entrance. Old Shoshone showed it to me years ago. If we can reach it, we'll be safe until dark." They set off immediately, moving as quickly as Lily's condition allowed. The sun climbed higher, bringing punishing heat that sapped their already depleted strength. Preston shared the last of their water, watching with concern as Lily's steps grew increasingly unsteady. "Just a little further," he encouraged, supporting her when she stumbled. The canyon entrance was nearly invisible, a narrow fissure in the rock face that required them to turn sideways to pass through. Beyond was a surprising oasis, a small spring-fed pool surrounded by cottonwoods, completely hidden from the outside world. Lily sank to the ground beside the pool, trailing her fingers in the cool water. "It's beautiful," she murmured, looking around with wonder. "How did you find this place?" "Spent a winter with the Shoshone after my first year out west," Preston explained, filling their canteens. "Their medicine man, Gray Wolf, took a liking to me, said I had a restless spirit that needed anchoring. He smiled at the memory. He showed me places like this, sacred spots where a man could find peace. And did you find peace? Lily's question was gentle but probing. Preston considered this as he gathered wood for a small, smokeless fire. Glimpses, moments, never lasted. He looked up at her. Until recently. They rested through the hottest part of the day, regaining strength for the journey ahead. Preston fashioned fishing hooks from thorns and managed to catch 2 small trout from the pool, which they cooked over their carefully tended fire. As evening approached, Lily studied the hand-drawn map Preston had created, showing their current position relative to Thorne's claim. "We're still a day's journey away," she noted, "and that's assuming we can travel directly." "I've been thinking about that," Preston said. "Those men knew we were heading to Thorne. They may have already sent someone there." Lily's face paled. "If they hurt him." "We need to get there first," Preston agreed, "but not by any route they'd expect." He pointed to a section of the map. "There's an old mining trail through these hills. Dangerous in places, washed out in others, but it could cut half a day off our journey." "Then that's our path," Lily said decisively. They set out at dusk, using the fading light to navigate the initial stretch of difficult terrain before the moon rose to guide them. The mining trail, as Preston had warned, was treacherous, a narrow path cut into steep hillsides, occasionally disappearing altogether where rockslides had obliterated sections. In those places, they were forced to create their own route, scrambling across loose scree that shifted ominously underfoot. Twice they had to backtrack when the path simply ended at sheer drops, adding precious hours to their journey. Dawn was breaking when disaster struck. A section of trail that appeared solid suddenly gave way beneath Lily's feet. With a startled cry, she began sliding toward the edge of a 50-foot drop. Preston lunged for her, catching her wrist just as she went over, his other hand clutching a protruding tree root. For one terrible moment, they hung suspended between safety and catastrophe, Lily dangling above the abyss while Preston's grip on both her and the root strained to its limit. Then, with a surge of desperate strength, he pulled her upward until she could grasp the edge of the trail. Together they crawled to safer ground, collapsing side by side, hearts pounding from the near disaster. "Thank you," Lily gasped when she could speak. Preston simply nodded, unable to vocalize the fear that had gripped him at the thought of losing her. Instead, he helped her to her feet, and they continued more cautiously, hyper-aware of every step on the treacherous path. By mid-morning, they reached the end of the mining trail, emerging onto a plateau that offered their first view of the valley where Thorne's claim was located. From their elevated position, they could see a cabin nestled against a hillside near a stream, presumably Thorne's dwelling, and more alarmingly, 3 riders approaching it from the south. "We're too late," Lily whispered, dismayed. Preston studied the scene through his field glasses. "Maybe not. They're still a fair distance away, and the angle of approach suggests they don't know the area well." He handed her the glasses. "See the ridge to the east of the cabin. There's a game trail that leads down from there. If we hurry, we might reach Thorne before they do." They made their way down from the plateau as quickly as safety allowed, Preston leading them on a zigzagging path that utilized natural cover. The sun was high overhead when they finally reached the valley floor, perhaps a mile from Thorne's cabin. "Stay low," Preston cautioned as they moved through a stand of pines that would shield their approach. "And watch for any sign of Thorne. He might have spotted those riders and taken up a defensive position." They had covered about half the remaining distance when a gunshot echoed across the valley. Preston pulled Lily down behind a fallen log as 2 more shots followed in quick succession. "That came from the cabin," he said grimly. Lily's face was determined despite her fear. We have to help him. Preston nodded, formulating a plan. I'll circle around to the west, try to get behind whoever's attacking. You stay here. No, Lily interrupted firmly. We do this together or not at all. She drew her revolver for emphasis. I'm not helpless, Preston. He knew better than to argue. All right. We'll approach from different angles. I'll take the west, you come in from the east. Stay within the tree line as long as possible. He touched her hand briefly. Be careful. No heroics. Same to you, she replied, her eyes conveying far more than her words. They separated, each moving toward their designated approach. Preston kept low, using every bit of cover available as he circled toward the cabin. Through breaks in the trees, he could see two men dismounted near the front, using their horses for cover as they fired toward the structure. Reaching the edge of the clearing, Preston paused to assess the situation. The cabin's single window was shattered, and bullet holes peppered the door. There was no sign of return fire, which worried him. Either Thorn was already hit or had fled. A movement to the east caught his attention. Lily had reached her position and was signaling that she was ready. Preston raised his rifle, taking careful aim at the nearest attacker. He needed to create enough distraction for Lily to reach the cabin safely. Taking a deep breath, he squeezed the trigger. The shot struck true, hitting the man's shoulder and spinning him around with a cry of pain. His companion immediately sought cover, looking frantically for the source of the attack. Preston fired again, deliberately missing but sending splinters flying from the tree next to the second man. As hoped, both attackers focused their attention westward, away from Lily's position. She seized the opportunity, darting from the tree line toward the rear of the cabin. Preston provided covering fire, keeping the men pinned down until she disappeared from view. Then he began moving as well, working his way closer while maintaining enough fire to prevent the attackers from advancing on the cabin. One of the men made a break for better cover and Preston's shot caught him in the leg, dropping him to the ground. The other, realizing their position was untenable, retreated toward the horses. "Mercer," he shouted. "Get up. We need to fall back." Preston recognized the wounded man, now the same hired gun they'd encountered earlier. Mercer struggled to his feet, limping toward the horses with his companion's assistance. "This isn't over, O'Malley," the second man called out. "The company doesn't take kindly to interference." They mounted awkwardly and galloped away, leaving a trail of blood that marked Mercer's passage. Preston watched until they disappeared from sight, then hurried to the cabin, concern for Lily overriding caution. The door was ajar when he reached it. Pushing it open carefully, rifle ready, he stepped inside to find Lily kneeling beside a prone figure on the floor. "Thorn?" Preston asked, though he already knew the answer. Lily looked up, her expression grim. "He's alive, but barely. They shot him before we arrived." The older man's breathing was shallow, his shirt soaked with blood from a wound in his chest. Preston knelt opposite Lily, examining the injury with experienced eyes. "Lungs punctured," he said quietly. "He's drowning in his own blood." Thorn's eyes fluttered open at the sound of voices, focusing with difficulty on the faces above him. "Emmett's girl," he rasped, recognition dawning. "You came." "I'm here, Mr. Thorn," Lily confirmed, taking his hand. "Save your strength." The wounded man shook his head slightly. "No time." "Listen." He coughed, flecks of blood staining his beard. "Your father found something, not just gold, something black that burns." "Coal," Preston suggested. "Different. Burns hotter, cleaner. Emmett said it would change everything." Thorn's breathing became more labored. "The company. They killed him when he wouldn't sell. Wanted to keep it secret until they could claim it all." Lily leaned closer. "Where is it? The deposit?" Thorn's eyes drifted toward a crude map pinned to the wall. "There. Devil's Backbone Ridge, but be careful, they'll kill for it. Already tried." His words trailed off as consciousness began to slip away. Preston pressed a cloth to the wound, trying to stem the bleeding, but they all knew it was futile. Thorne rallied briefly, his gaze finding Lily's face. "Your father was proud of you," he whispered. "Talked about you all the time." "His clever girl." Tears filled Lily's eyes. "Thank you for being his friend." Thorne nodded faintly, then turned to Preston. "Take care of her, O'Malley. She's special." His lips curved in a ghost of a smile. "Like that anchor gray wolf always said you needed." Preston started, surprised that Thorne knew of his time with the Shoshone. "I will," he promised solemnly. With a final, rattling breath, Jacob Thorne slipped away, his weathered face relaxing in death. Lily closed his eyes gently, murmuring a prayer as Preston stood to retrieve the map from the wall. It was crude but detailed, showing a section of mountains about 20 miles northwest. A red X marked a specific location on a ridge labeled Devil's Backbone. "This is what they're after," Preston said softly. "What they killed your father for." Lily joined him, studying the map through tear-blurred eyes. "And Thorne, we need to make sure they didn't die for nothing." She looked up at Preston. "Will you help me finish this?" "I know I've already asked too much." Preston silenced her with a gentle finger to her lips. "You haven't asked anything I wasn't already willing to give." The words carried weight beyond their immediate context, and they both knew it. After burying Thorne in a grave marked by a simple wooden cross, they gathered what supplies they could from the cabin. Preston found a mule in Thorne's corral that would serve as a mount for their journey, while Lily discovered a journal that detailed some of her father's findings. "He was right," she said, paging through the technical descriptions. "This wasn't just a gold deposit. He found something called oil shale, a rock that contains a substance that can be refined into a fuel far more efficient than coal." Preston whistled softly. No wonder the company was willing to kill for it. That kind of discovery could make a man rich beyond imagining. "Or a corporation powerful beyond restraint," Lily added grimly. "My father wanted the discovery to benefit everyone, not just line the pockets of a few wealthy investors." She closed the journal decisively. "And so do I." They set out for Devil's Backbone as afternoon waned, knowing they were racing against both time and determined enemies. The company men would regroup, perhaps bring reinforcements and come after them again. Their only advantage was knowledge of their destination, and a few hours' head start. The terrain grew increasingly challenging as they entered the mountains, following game trails and old Native American paths that wound through forests of pine and aspen. They made camp that night in a protected hollow, building a small fire for warmth as the mountain air turned crisp with autumn's approach. Sitting side by side, sharing a meal of provisions from Thorne's cabin, they allowed themselves a brief respite from constant vigilance. The stars emerged one by one in the clear mountain sky, a brilliant tapestry that seemed to hang just beyond reach. "What will you do?" Preston asked quietly. "If we find this deposit and secure your claim?" Lily considered the question, her face thoughtful in the firelight. "Ensure it's developed responsibly. Use the proceeds to establish a trust for educational purposes." She smiled slightly. "And perhaps build a life somewhere peaceful, with someone who understands the value of both solitude and companionship." Her meaning was clear, and Preston felt something tight in his chest loosen. "Sounds like a fine plan." They slept curled together beneath Preston's coat, finding comfort in each other's warmth against the mountain chill. Morning came too soon, gray light filtering through the trees as they resumed their journey. By mid-afternoon, they reached the base of Devil's Backbone, a jagged ridge that resembled the spine of some prehistoric creature jutting against the sky. According to Thorne's map, The deposit was located near the northern end, in a series of exposed rock faces that would require climbing to access. "We should approach from the east," Preston suggested, studying the terrain. "Less exposed and the slopes more gradual." They tethered their mounts in a hidden meadow and continued on foot, carrying only essential supplies and weapons. The climb was arduous, loose rock giving way underfoot and scrub pine offering treacherous handholds that sometimes came away entirely when grasped. Lily matched Preston's pace despite her still-healing wound, her determination never faltering even when the path grew perilous. By the time they neared the location marked on the map, the sun was beginning its westward descent, casting long shadows across the mountainside. "There," Lily pointed to a dark fissure in the rock face ahead. "That must be it." They approached cautiously, alert for any sign of danger. The opening was narrow but widened into a small cave beyond. Inside, the walls gleamed with unusual striations, layers of different colored rock that sparkled faintly in the light that filtered through the entrance. Lily ran her fingers along the wall, excitement building. "This is it, just as Father described it." She opened his journal, comparing the diagrams to the rock formations before them. Oil shale with veins of gold running through it, a double discovery. Preston examined the cave carefully. "Your father was thorough. There are survey markers here, and it looks like he took samples from several locations." He pointed to small chisel marks in the rock. "He was building his case methodically. And now we'll finish what he started," Lily said firmly. She retrieved a small leather pouch from her pack, collecting fresh samples to support their claim. "With these and my father's notes, we can prove the company knowingly orchestrated his death to steal his discovery." As she worked, Preston kept watch from the cave entrance. The valley below lay peaceful in the late afternoon light, but experience had taught him that danger often came when least expected. His vigilance was rewarded. When he spotted movement on the trail, they had ascended 3 riders pushing their mounts hard up the slope. "We've got company," he called to Lily. "At least 3, maybe more behind them." She joined him at the entrance, samples secured in her pack. "How did they find us so quickly? Doesn't matter now. We need to move." Preston assessed their options rapidly. "We can't go back the way we came. They'd cut us off before we reached the horses." "What about continuing along the ridge?" Lily suggested. "It might connect to another trail down the far side." It was a desperate plan, but their only viable option. They quickly gathered their belongings and set off along the narrow spine of the ridge, staying low to avoid being silhouetted against the sky. The path, if it could be called that, was barely wide enough for single-file travel, with sheer drops on either side. They had covered perhaps half a mile when the first shots rang out behind them. Their pursuers had reached the cave and spotted their escape route. "Keep moving," Preston urged as bullets ricocheted off rocks nearby. He turned briefly to return fire, more to slow their pursuers than with any real hope of hitting them at this distance. The ridge narrowed further, forcing them to edge sideways along sections where the drop was hundreds of feet to the rocks below. Lily moved with surprising grace despite the danger, her focus absolute as she navigated the treacherous path. Rounding a bend in the ridge, they encountered an unexpected obstacle, a gap of about 8 feet where a section had collapsed, leaving nothing but empty air between them and the continuation of the path. "We'll have to jump," Preston said grimly, gauging the distance. Lily looked at the gap, then at the dizzying drop below. "I can do it," she said with more confidence than she likely felt. Preston went first, taking a running start on the narrow ledge and launching himself across the void. He landed safely on the other side, immediately turning to brace himself for Lily's jump. "I'll catch you," he promised, extending his hands. Lily backed up as far as she dared, took a deep breath and ran toward the gap. She leapt with all her strength, arms outstretched toward Preston. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed she might fall short, but Preston lunged forward, catching her wrists and pulling her to safety. They collapsed together on the narrow ledge, hearts pounding from the near disaster. Before they could recover, more shots rang out as their pursuers reached the bend in the ridge. "Behind the rocks," Preston directed, pulling Lily toward an outcropping that offered minimal cover. They crouched there as bullets struck stone around them, chipping fragments that stung their exposed skin. Preston returned fire judiciously, conserving ammunition. "They can't follow us across that gap easily," he observed. "But they can pin us down until nightfall, and we'd be sitting ducks trying to navigate this ridge in the dark." Lily scanned their surroundings, searching for options. "There," she pointed to a narrow fissure in the rock face behind them. "Could that be a way down?" It wasn't much a crack in the nearly vertical cliff that might or might not widen into a passable route, but it offered their only alternative to the deadly stalemate on the ridge. They retreated to the fissure while Preston provided covering fire. Up close, the opening was barely wide enough for them to squeeze through sideways, and beyond was darkness that revealed nothing about where it might lead. "I'll go first," Preston said, holstering his revolver. "Stay close behind me. If I say stop, freeze exactly where you are." The passage was claustrophobic, the rock walls pressing in from both sides as they edged deeper into the mountain. After about 20 feet, it widened slightly, allowing them to move more freely. Faint light filtered down from above, revealing that they were in a natural chimney of sorts, a vertical shaft that appeared to descend deep into the mountain. "There might be a way down," Preston said, examining the rough walls. "Handholds look natural but usable." The decision was made for them as voices echoed from the entrance to the fissure. Their pursuers had found a way across the gap and were closing in. "We climb down," Lily said decisively. Preston went first, testing each hold before trusting his weight to it, guiding Lily's feet to secure positions as they descended. The shaft was perhaps 40 feet deep, opening eventually into a larger cavern where underground water had carved out a more substantial space over millennia. They reached the bottom as voices grew louder above. Preston helped Lily away from the shaft entrance, both of them pressing against the cavern wall as loose stones and dirt rained down their pursuers were attempting to follow. "This way," Preston whispered, pulling Lily toward a dark opening on the far side of the cavern. They had no way of knowing where it led, but staying put wasn't an option. The tunnel wound downward, occasionally branching into multiple passages. Preston chose their path based on instinct and the faint movement of air that suggested a route to the outside. Behind them, voices and the occasional gunshot echoed, indicating that at least some of their pursuers had successfully navigated the shaft. After what seemed like hours of tense progress through increasingly tight passages, they detected a glimmer of daylight ahead. The tunnel emerged onto a steep, wooded slope on the western face of the mountain, far from where they'd left their horses, but also far from their pursuers, at least temporarily. "We need to keep moving," Preston said, helping Lily over the rough terrain. "They'll eventually find this exit too." They descended as quickly as safety allowed, using trees and rocks for support on the steep slope. The forest grew thicker as they reached lower elevations, providing welcome cover as dusk approached. Finding a small stream, they paused to drink and assess their situation. They were alive but effectively stranded in remote wilderness with limited supplies. Their horses and most of their provisions were on the opposite side of the mountain, as were the samples that would prove their claim. "We need to circle back," Lily said, voicing what they both knew. "Without those samples and the journal, we have no proof." Preston nodded, studying the lengthening shadows. "We'll wait until full dark, then circle around the base of the mountain. If we're lucky, they'll assume we're still trying to escape and focus their search westward." As night fell, they made their way cautiously through the forest, using the stars for navigation. The journey was slow and arduous, requiring them to cross several ravines and ford a fast-moving creek swollen by recent mountain rains. By dawn, they had reached the eastern side of Devil's Backbone, though still far from where they'd left their mounts. They found a sheltered hollow to rest during daylight hours, taking turns keeping watch while the other slept. As Lily slept, Preston studied her face, struck by how quickly she had come to matter to him. In the short time since he'd found her wounded on the prairie, she had awakened feelings he'd thought long buried: hope, purpose, and a yearning for connection he'd denied for years. When she woke, he shared the last of their jerky, their fingers brushing in a touch that lingered. "We should reach the horses by nightfall," he said. "If they haven't been found." Lily nodded, her expression determined despite her exhaustion. "And then we make for the nearest U.S. Marshal's office in Billings. With the evidence we have and Thorne's dying testimony, they'll have to investigate the company." They resumed their journey as the sun began its westward arc, moving with increased urgency as the day waned. The terrain became familiar as they approached the meadow where they'd left their mounts. Preston signaled for caution as they neared the clearing, dropping to a crouch as he scanned for any sign of their enemies. The meadow appeared peaceful, their horses still tethered where they'd left them. "It seems too easy," Lily whispered, her instincts now as sharp as his after days of pursuit. Preston nodded grimly. "Stay here. I'll circle around, make sure it's not a trap." Moving with the stealth of a lifetime spent in wilderness, he made a wide arc around the meadow, checking for signs of recent passage or hidden watchers. Finding nothing suspicious, he returned to Lily. "Looks clear, but we'll approach carefully. If anything seems wrong, we retreat immediately." They moved toward the horses, every sense alert for danger. The animals nickered softly in recognition as they approached, seemingly undisturbed since they'd been left. Preston was checking the mule's pack when the shot rang out, the bullet kicking up dirt at his feet. Instantly, he shoved Lily toward cover behind a large boulder, drawing his revolver as he dove alongside her. "Where?" she gasped, pressing herself against the rock. "Ridge to the north," Preston replied, peering cautiously around their shelter. "Single shooter, I think." Another shot confirmed his assessment, chipping stone from their protective boulder. Preston returned fire, aiming for the flash he'd spotted among the trees on the ridge. "We're pinned down," he said grimly, "and light's fading fast. Soon we won't be able to see to shoot or escape." Lily's expression hardened with resolve. "We need a distraction." She unholstered her revolver. "I'll draw their fire while you get to the horses." "Absolutely not," Preston objected. "I won't risk you like that. You have a better shot at getting us out of here," she insisted. "I can provide covering fire while you bring the horses closer. Then we both make a break for it." Before he could argue further, she fired 3 rapid shots toward the ridge, then scrambled to a new position behind a fallen log. The shooter's attention followed her, bullets splintering wood where she'd taken cover. Preston seized the opportunity, sprinting to the horses and quickly untethering them. Leading them to a position closer to Lily but still partially sheltered by trees, he called out to her. "Now, run to me." Lily fired once more toward the ridge, then broke cover, zigzagging across the open ground toward Preston and the horses. A shot rang out and she stumbled, crying out as she fell to one knee. Preston's heart stopped. Without thinking, he ran to her, firing repeatedly toward the shooter to force them to take cover. Reaching Lily, he pulled her up in half, carried her the remaining distance to the horses. "Are you hit?" he demanded, frantically checking for injuries. Lily shook her head, grimacing. "Turned my ankle when I dodged. I'm all right." Relief flooded him, quickly replaced by urgency as more shots came from the ridge. He helped her mount, then swung up behind her, leading the mule as they galloped from the meadow into the shelter of the forest beyond. They rode hard through the gathering dusk, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and their pursuer. Only when the horses began to tire did Preston slow their pace, guiding them to a small clearing beside a creek where they could rest briefly. Dismounting, he helped Lily down, supporting her weight as she tested her injured ankle. "It's just a sprain," she assured him. "I can ride." Preston examined the swollen joint, wrapping it with strips torn from his spare shirt. "We need to keep moving. That shooter will have signaled the others by now." As if in confirmation of his words, they heard distant hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching from the direction they'd fled. "No rest for the weary," Lily said with grim humor, accepting Preston's help to remount. They continued through the night, following game trails and creek beds to mask their trail. By dawn, they had covered nearly 20 miles, entering more populated country where scattered homesteads and small settlements began to appear. "Billings is still a day's ride," Preston said as they paused to water the horses at a small pond. "But there's a trading post about 5 miles ahead. We might get information there, maybe even help." The trading post was a rustic affair, a log building with attached stables and corral that served the surrounding homesteaders and occasional travelers. As they approached, Preston noted with relief that there were no horses outside that matched the distinctive palomino one of their pursuers had ridden. The proprietor, a grizzled man named Jenkins, greeted them with the casual curiosity of one accustomed to all manner of visitors. His eyebrows rose slightly at Lily's masculine attire and obvious fatigue, but asked no questions as Preston purchased supplies and inquired about the road to Billings. "Had some fellas through here yesterday asking about a man and woman traveling together," Jenkins mentioned casually as he wrapped jerky in brown paper. "Seemed mighty interested in finding you. Offered a reward." Preston kept his expression neutral. "That's so. What you tell them?" Jenkins spat a stream of tobacco juice into a nearby spittoon. "Told him I mind my business and suggest others do the same. They didn't take kindly to that advice." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Rode east toward Miller's Crossing. If you're avoiding a meeting, I'd suggest the northern route through Cottonwood Pass." Preston nodded gratefully, sliding extra coins across the counter. "Much obliged for the direction." As they prepared to leave, Jenkins called Preston back inside while Lily waited with the horses. "Word of advice," the old trader said quietly. "Whatever trouble you're in, it's bigger than you think. One of those men was Edwin Carver. He's Montana Mining Company's chief enforcer, not a man to cross lightly." The name sent a chill through Preston. Carver's reputation was well known throughout the territory, a former Army officer turned corporate gun, responsible for resolving numerous disputes in the company's favor, always legally but rarely justly. "We've got evidence of murder," Preston said simply. "Company men killed for a claim." Jenkins nodded slowly. "Figured it was something like that. Look, there's a U.S. Marshal named Holden passing through Miller's Crossing tomorrow. Good man, honest, if you can reach him before Carver realizes you're there." Preston clasped the trader's hand. "Thank you." They altered their plans immediately, heading northeast toward Miller's Crossing rather than continuing to Billings. The route was longer but offered their best chance of finding justice if they could reach Marshal Holden, before Carver intercepted them. They rode steadily through the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and tend to Lily's ankle, which had swollen further despite her efforts to ignore the pain. By nightfall, they had covered about half the distance to Miller's Crossing. Making camp in a sheltered ravine, they built a small fire, screened to prevent its light from being visible at a distance. Preston prepared a simple meal while Lily organized their evidence: her father's journal, Thorne's map, and the samples they'd collected from the deposit. "Do you think it will be enough?" she asked, arranging the materials in a leather portfolio. Preston considered this as he stirred their coffee. The journal and Thorne's dying words establish motive. The samples prove the value of the claim. It's circumstantial, but enough for an investigation. Carver and his men won't risk going against a federal marshal directly. Lily seemed less convinced. Men who kill for profit rarely develop scruples when confronted with the law. "Which is why we need to be careful," Preston agreed. "We'll approach Miller's Crossing cautiously, make sure it's not a trap." As they ate, the conversation turned to more personal matters. "What will you do after?" Preston asked. "If we succeed in proving your claim and bringing the company to justice?" Lily gazed into the fire, contemplation shadowing her features. "I've been so focused on finding the truth, on honoring my father's memory, I haven't really thought beyond that." She looked up at Preston. "What about you? Will you return to your cabin and solitude?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Preston realized with sudden clarity that he couldn't imagine returning to his isolated existence now that Lily had entered his life. The thought of their paths diverging left an emptiness he wasn't prepared to face. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "that maybe it's time for a change. Perhaps a piece of land near a growing town, something with good water and grazing, a place where a man might build something lasting." Their eyes met across the fire, understanding passing between them without words. Lily's smile held promise and possibility. "That sounds like a fine plan, Mr. O'Malley, though I imagine such an endeavor would be considerable work for one person." "I had considered that," he replied, his voice soft in the night. "Thought perhaps I might find a partner. Someone with spirit and determination. Someone who values education and progress." He paused, gathering courage. "Someone I've grown to care for more than I thought possible in such a short time." Lily moved around the fire to sit beside him, her hand finding his in the darkness. "I think such a partnership could be arranged," she whispered, "if the offer is sincere." Preston turned to her, cupping her face gently with his free hand. "More sincere than anything I've ever said." Their first kiss was tender, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened with the intensity of feelings that had grown through shared danger and mutual respect. When they finally parted, Preston rested his forehead against hers, overwhelmed by emotions long dormant now surging to life. "I never expected to find you," he murmured. "Never thought I'd want this again." Lily traced the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Sometimes life brings us exactly what we need, even when we don't know to ask for it." They spent the night in each other's arms, finding comfort and connection despite the dangers that still surrounded them. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the reality of their situation and the urgency of reaching Miller's Crossing before Carver could intercept them. They broke camp at dawn, traveling cross-country rather than following established trails to reduce the chance of ambush. The landscape gradually changed from rugged wilderness to scattered homesteads and cultivated fields as they approached the settlement. By mid-afternoon, they crested a ridge that offered their first view of Miller's Crossing, a small but growing town nestled in a valley beside a meandering river. From their vantage point, they could see activity in the main street, wagons and riders moving about their business. "Looks peaceful enough," Lily observed. No sign of Carver or his men. Preston remained cautious. "We'll approach from the north through that stand of cottonwoods. Keep your eyes open for anything unusual." They descended toward the town, alert for danger. The cottonwood grove provided cover until they were within 100 yards of the first buildings, mostly simple structures of wood and stone that lined a single main street. Preston reined in their horses at the edge of the trees. "Wait here. I'll go ahead, make sure it's safe." Lily caught his arm. "Be careful, please." He touched her cheek gently. "Always am. If I'm not back in 20 minutes or if you hear trouble, ride for Billings. Don't wait for me." She nodded reluctantly, knowing the wisdom of his plan even as she hated the thought of leaving him behind. Preston approached the town on foot, his manner casual but his senses alert for any sign of danger. The settlement seemed normal. A blacksmith hammered at his forge, women chatted outside the general store. A group of men lounged on the porch of what appeared to be a saloon. He made his way to the sheriff's office, a small building with a single barred window adjacent to the town's only bank. Inside, he found a deputy sorting wanted posters at a scarred wooden desk. "Afternoon," Preston greeted him. "Looking for Marshal Holden. Heard he might be passing through." The young deputy looked up with mild interest. "He's due in tonight. Something I can help you with." Preston weighed his options carefully. "Just need to speak with him about a land dispute. When exactly do you expect him?" "Stage from Helena arrives around 7, the deputy replied. "You can wait here if you'd like." "Much obliged, but I'll check back later." Preston tipped his hat and left, circling the small town to ensure there was no sign of Carver or his men before returning to Lily. "Marshals arriving on the evening stage," he reported. "Town seems quiet." No sign of company men. Relief washed over Lily's features. "Then we made it. We actually made it." "Not quite yet," Preston cautioned. "We need somewhere to wait until the stage arrives. Somewhere with good visibility of anyone entering town." They decided on the hotel, a modest 2-story structure that offered rooms overlooking the main street. The proprietress, a friendly widow named Mrs. Hollister, asked few questions as she provided them with a corner room and the luxury of hot water for washing. Cleaned and somewhat refreshed, they sat by the window watching the town prepare for evening. The streets grew busier as ranchers and farmers completed their business before heading home, and lamps were lit in storefront windows as dusk approached. "It feels strange," Lily mused. Being among people again after days in wilderness. Being safe, or relatively so. Preston understood her meaning perfectly. The rhythms of civilization seemed foreign after their time on the run. The ordinary movements of townspeople, almost surreal in contrast to the life-or-death struggle they'd experienced. As the appointed hour for the stage's arrival approached, they made their way downstairs to the hotel's small dining room for a proper meal, their first in days. Preston positioned himself facing the door, his revolver within easy reach beneath his coat. They had just finished eating when the unmistakable sound of a stagecoach approaching reached them, the clatter of hooves and rumble of wheels, accompanied by the driver's shouts to his team. Preston moved to the window, watching as the vehicle pulled up before the town's small station across the street. "That's our marshal," he said as a tall man in a dark coat descended from the coach, distinguished by the badge visible on his chest even at this distance. They hurried outside, intending to intercept Holden before he could disappear into the hotel or sheriff's office. They were halfway across the street when Preston spotted them, 3 riders entering the town from the east, one on a distinctive palomino. "Carver," he hissed, grabbing Lily's arm. "Move quickly, but don't run. We need to reach the marshal before they spot us." They altered their course slightly, angling toward where Holden stood supervising the unloading of luggage from the stage. The marshal looked up as they approached, his weathered face revealing nothing as Preston addressed him. "Marshal Holden, my name is Preston O'Malley. This is Miss Lily Daniels. We need your help on an urgent matter of justice." Holden studied them briefly before responding. "What kind of justice, Mr. O'Malley?" "Murder, sir. An attempted murder. We have evidence against the Montana Mining Company, specifically Edwin Carver, who is entering town as we speak." Preston gestured subtly toward the approaching riders. The marshal's expression remained impassive, but his eyes sharpened. "That's a serious accusation against powerful people. I assume you can back it up." Lily stepped forward, holding out the leather portfolio. "My father was Emmett Daniels, a geologist with the company. He discovered a valuable deposit and was killed for it. We have his journal, maps, and samples to prove it." Holden accepted the portfolio, glancing briefly at its contents. Whatever he might have said next was interrupted by a shout from down the street. "O'Malley! Daniels!" Carver's voice rang out, commanding attention from everyone within earshot. He and his men had dismounted and were advancing on foot, hands hovering near their weapons. The marshal assessed the situation quickly, passing the portfolio back to Lily. "Get inside the station," he directed. "Deputy Simmons," he called to a young man nearby, "escort these folks inside and stay with them." As they moved toward the relative safety of the station building, Holden stepped forward to intercept Carver, his stance relaxed but authoritative. "Evening, Carver. Business in Miller's Crossing." The company man halted, his cold eyes flickering between the marshal and the retreating figures of Preston and Lily. "Personal matter, Marshal. Nothing that concerns you. When armed men pursue civilians through my jurisdiction, it becomes my concern," Holden replied evenly. "Especially when accusations of murder are involved." Carver's face hardened. "They're thieves and liars, stole company property. We're simply recovering what's ours." "Then you won't mind waiting while I examine their evidence and hear their side," the marshal said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. For a tense moment, it seemed Carver might challenge the lawman directly. His hand hovered near his holster, his men spreading out slightly behind him. Then, with visible effort, he controlled himself. "Of course, Marshal, we have nothing to hide, but I advise you not to take too long. The company's patience isn't limitless, even with federal officers." The veiled threat hung in the air as Holden nodded once, then turned to follow Preston and Lily into the station. Inside, the deputy had already lit lamps and cleared a table where they could present their evidence. Over the next hour, Lily explained her father's discovery and subsequent death. Preston recounted their pursuit by Carver's men and Thorne's murder, and they presented the journal, maps, and samples as corroboration. Marshal Holden listened attentively, asking occasional pointed questions that revealed a sharp legal mind behind his taciturn exterior. "It's enough for an investigation," he concluded finally. "I'll take statements from both of you, then telegraph the federal prosecutor in Helena. The samples will need to be verified by experts, of course." "And in the meantime," Preston asked, acutely aware that Carver and his men remained in town, undoubtedly planning their next move. "In the meantime, you're under my protection," Holden stated firmly. "I'll have Deputy Simmons arrange rooms at the hotel. My presence should deter any direct action from Carver, but keep your weapons close and your eyes open." The night passed tensely, but without incident. From their hotel window, Preston observed Carver and his men taking rooms at the saloon across the street, clearly settling in to wait. By morning, the telegraph had hummed with activity as Marshal Holden communicated with authorities in Helena. The prosecutor is sending an agent to collect the evidence and escort you both to Helena for formal statements, Holden informed them over breakfast. Should arrive on tomorrow's stage. And Carver? Lily asked. He's been told not to leave town. He doesn't like it, but he's complying for now. The marshal's expression was grim. But I don't trust him to accept defeat easily. The company has a lot to lose if this becomes public. Preston shared the marshal's concern. We should remain vigilant until we're safely in Helena. The day passed with excruciating slowness, their movements restricted to the hotel and sheriff's office to minimize the chance of confrontation. By evening, the strain of waiting had left them both on edge, jumping at every unusual sound. Try to get some sleep, Preston suggested as they retired to their adjoining rooms. I'll keep watch for a while. Lily touched his face gently. Wake me for my turn. You need rest too. He nodded, though they both knew he was unlikely to sleep much while danger remained so close. Preston sat by the window, watching the quiet street below. The town had settled for the night, only the saloon showing signs of life with yellow light spilling from its windows and occasional bursts of laughter breaking the silence. He must have dozed despite his intentions, for he woke with a start to find the street changed the saloon dark, the hour clearly well past midnight. Something had disturbed his sleep, some sound or sense of wrongness that had penetrated his exhaustion. Then he smelled its smoke, acrid and unmistakable. Looking out, he saw flames licking at the base of the hotel's wooden staircase, deliberately set and already taking hold with alarming speed. Lily, he shouted, bursting into her room. Fire! We need to move now. She was instantly alert, grabbing the precious portfolio of evidence as Preston collected their weapons. The hallway was already filling with smoke when they emerged, flames visible at the far end where the stairs descended to the lobby. We're trapped, Lily realized, coughing as the smoke thickened. They've cut off our escape. Preston pulled her toward the window at the end of the hall. Not quite. Looking out, he saw a sloping roof over the hotel's kitchen extension about 8 feet below their position. We can drop to that roof, then to the ground. It's our only chance. Other guests were emerging from their rooms now, confusion and fear evident as they realized their predicament. Preston helped an elderly couple toward the window, explaining the escape route as Lily demonstrated by being the first to climb out and drop safely to the lower roof. One by one, the hotel's occupants followed, Preston assisting those who needed help and ensuring no one was left behind. The marshal and his deputy appeared in the street below, organizing a bucket brigade from the nearby horse trough to fight the blaze. Preston was the last to exit, the hallway nearly impassable with smoke and flame by the time he climbed through the window. He landed beside Lily on the kitchen roof, which was now growing uncomfortably hot as the fire spread. We need to get to the ground quickly, he urged, helping her to the edge where they could drop the remaining 10 feet to relative safety. They had just reached the street when a shot rang out, the bullet striking the wall inches from Lily's head. Preston pulled her behind the cover of a water barrel as more shots followed. Carver, he growled, recognizing the distinctive report of the company man's rifle. Using the confusion to finish what he started, Marshal Holden appeared beside them, revolver drawn. He's in the livery stable, he informed them tersely. Firing from the hayloft, my deputies circling around back. This is my fight too, Preston said, checking his revolver. Holden nodded grimly. Stay low, he's got the advantage of height. As they prepared to move, Lily touched Preston's arm. Be careful, she whispered. I've only just found you, I don't intend to lose you now. He squeezed her hand in silent promise, then followed the marshal as they used the chaos of the fire to approach the livery from different angles. The flames had spread to adjacent buildings, creating a hellish backdrop to their deadly game of cat and mouse. A shot from the stable narrowly missed the marshal, who returned fire but failed to hit his target in the darkness of the hayloft. Preston circled wider, looking for a way to approach unseen. He found it in a back entrance, normally used for moving hay into the storage area. Climbing quietly, he entered the loft from behind, his footsteps masked by the commotion outside. Carver was positioned at the front of the loft, rifle trained on the street below. He was so focused on his prey that he failed to hear Preston's approach until it was too late. "Drop it, Carver," Preston commanded, his revolver aimed squarely at the company man's back. Carver froze, then slowly lowered his rifle. "You're making a mistake, O'Malley," he said, turning to face his adversary. "The company looks after its own. Kill me and they'll send others. You'll never be safe." "I'm not going to kill you," Preston replied evenly. "You're going to stand trial for murder. Thorne, Emmett Daniels, how many others that we don't know about yet?" A cold smile spread across Carver's face. "You're a fool if you think this reaches trial. There are judges, politicians, lawmen on the company payroll across the territory. Even if you get me to Helena, nothing will come of it." "Maybe," Preston acknowledged, "or maybe this time justice prevails. Either way, your days of hunting innocent people are over." Something in Carver seemed to snap at these words. With a snarl of rage, he lunged forward, not toward Preston but toward the edge of the loft, drawing a hidden derringer as he moved. Preston realized his target in an instant: Lily, who had emerged from cover to help an injured woman away from the spreading fire. He fired without hesitation, his bullet striking Carver in the shoulder and spinning him away from the loft opening. But the company man's momentum carried him forward, and with a cry of surprise and pain, he toppled from the loft to the street below. The fall wasn't fatal, but it left Carver injured and effectively ended his resistance. As Marshal Holden and his deputy secured the wounded man, Preston hurried to Lily, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "Truly over." She clung to him, trembling with relief and lingering fear. "I was so afraid I'd lose you." "Never," he promised, drawing back to look into her eyes. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Dawn broke over Miller's Crossing to reveal a town transformed, several buildings reduced to smoldering ruins, others saved only by the determined efforts of its citizens. The hotel was among the casualties, though thankfully there had been no loss of life thanks to Preston's quick action. The stage from Helena arrived earlier than expected, bringing not only the promised federal agent but also a surprise Jacob Harlow, a prominent newspaper publisher known for his crusades against corporate corruption. Marshal Holden had taken the precaution of contacting him, ensuring that the story would reach the public regardless of any attempts to suppress the investigation. Carver, under guard at the doctor's office where his injuries were treated, maintained a sullen silence as formal charges were prepared. His men, having abandoned their leader when the tide turned, had fled during the night. As Lily gave her statement to the federal agent, Preston found himself recounting the events of the past days to Harlow, whose pen flew across his notebook, capturing details for what would undoubtedly become a sensational exposé. "This will make waves all the way to the territorial governor's office," the newspaperman commented, eyes bright with the scent of a major story. "The mining companies have operated with impunity for too long." By noon, arrangements had been finalized for their journey to Helena, where formal proceedings would commence against both Carver and the Montana Mining Company. Marshal Holden would escort them personally, taking no chances with their safety until justice was secured. As they prepared to depart, Preston drew Lily aside, away from the bustle of the staging area. "Before we go, there's something I need to ask you," he said, his customary confidence giving way to an uncharacteristic nervousness. "These past days have shown me what truly matters in life. I don't want to waste another moment." Lily's eyes widened as Preston took her hands in his. "What are you saying, Preston?" "I'm saying that I love you, Lily Daniels. That finding you bleeding on the prairie was the best thing that ever happened to me, though I wouldn't wish the circumstances on anyone." He smiled slightly at the paradox. "I'm saying that whatever comes after this, whether we win or lose against the company, I want to face it with you. As my wife, if you'll have me." Tears welled in Lily's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Preston O'Malley. I love you too, more than I thought possible in so short a time." Their kiss was witnessed by a smiling Marshal Holden, who discreetly turned away to give them a moment of privacy before announcing it was time to depart. The journey to Helena passed without incident, the presence of a federal marshal evidently deterring any further attempts by company sympathizers to interfere. Upon arrival, Lily and Preston found themselves at the center of a growing controversy as Harlow's initial report hit the newspapers, drawing attention from as far away as San Francisco and Chicago. The evidence they had gathered proved compelling. Experts confirmed the value of the oil shale deposit, and comparisons with Emmett Daniels's handwriting verified the authenticity of the journal. Most damning were the financial records subpoenaed from the company, showing payoffs to local officials to suppress investigation into both Daniels's death and other accidents at company properties. As summer turned to autumn, the legal proceedings continued. Preston and Lily remained in Helena, staying at a modest boarding house while the case progressed. Despite company lawyers' efforts to discredit them, the weight of evidence and public opinion ultimately proved too strong to overcome. In October 1878, the territorial court ruled in Lily's favor, granting her full rights to her father's claim and ordering substantial compensation for his wrongful death. More significantly, the ruling opened the door for similar claims against the company, creating a precedent that would change the balance of power between corporations and individuals throughout the territory. Carver was sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison, his testimony against company executives securing him a lesser punishment than the hanging many thought he deserved. Several company officials fled the territory rather than face charges, while others found their political and business connections suddenly reluctant to associate with them. With justice served and her father's legacy secured, Lily turned her attention to the future she and Preston had begun to plan. The compensation from the court case provided them with means to start anew, while the claim itself would generate income for years to come under the responsible development plan Lily insisted upon. They were married on a crisp November day in a small church in Helena, with Marshal Holden serving as Preston's best man and Mrs. Hollister, who had come from Miller's Crossing for the occasion, standing with Lily. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, their vows carrying the weight of all they had endured together. "I never expected to find love in the midst of danger," Lily said afterward as they shared a private moment before the wedding dinner. "But I wouldn't change how we met, despite everything. It showed me your true character from the start." Preston brushed a strand of hair from her face, marveling at how this extraordinary woman had transformed his life. "When I found you wounded on the prairie, something told me my life would never be the same. I just didn't realize how right that feeling would be." As winter settled over Montana territory, Preston and Lily O'Malley journeyed north to the land they had purchased near the growing town of Great Falls. The property was everything they had hoped for: fertile bottomland beside a clear stream, with rolling hills that would provide excellent grazing and natural shelter for livestock. They built their first home together that winter, a sturdy cabin that would serve until spring allowed for more substantial construction. Working side by side, they created a place that combined the best of both their visions: Preston's practical knowledge of frontier living harmonizing with Lily's appreciation for comfort and beauty. By spring, the foundations were laid for a permanent homestead. The proceeds from the claim allowed them to hire help for the larger projects. And by summer's end, a proper house stood where the cabin had been spacious enough for the family they hoped to create. With a special room set aside for the small school Lily planned to establish for neighboring children. True to her word, Lily had established a trust with a portion of her settlement, dedicated to educational opportunities for those who might otherwise go without. The first scholarships were awarded that fall, sending 2 promising students from Montana to universities in the East. As their first anniversary approached, Preston returned from Great Falls with the mail to find Lily waiting on the porch, her expression both nervous and joyful. "What is it?" he asked, immediately concerned by her unusual demeanor. She took his hands, guiding them to rest against her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she said softly. "Next spring." Preston's world tilted on its axis for the second time since meeting Lily Daniels. Joy, unlike anything he'd known, surged through him as he gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his exuberance. "A baby," he repeated in wonder. "Our child." Lily laughed, her happiness matching his own. "Our family, the beginning of our legacy." That night, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and crimson, Preston reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance encounter on the Montana prairie to building a life together, every step, even the dangerous ones, had led them exactly where they were meant to be. Lily leaned against his shoulder, her hand clasped in his. "What are you thinking about so intently?" Preston smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "About the day I found you, about how close we came to never having this." He placed his free hand over hers, resting on her stomach where their child grew. "I remember holding you while you shivered from shock and blood loss, telling you that you had to live because I needed you to. I didn't even understand then how true those words would become." Lily turned her face up to his, love shining in her eyes. "And here we are, building that life together. It's more than I ever dreamed possible." "Just the beginning," Preston promised, sealing the words with a kiss as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, bearing witness to a love born in danger but destined to flourish in peace.